Laws in Space. I'm Tonya Hall, and joining me is James Dunstan, founder of Mobius Legal Group and general counsel at TechFreedom. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Tonya.
Tell us about your tech background and explain what TechFreedom does.
So my tech background is I'm actually all self-trained. I took a class in college of econometrics, which is sort of the mathematical side of economics. And for that, we had to learn how to program computers. And this is back in the IBM 360 days, punch cards, and programming in Fortran. I then got into law school, thought I would go off to Wall Street and be a tool. But then in my second year, I took the tax and corporation class. And by the way, my tax professor was Martin Ginsburg, the late husband of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But as good of a professor as he was, I was bored out of my mind. And so I, along with a classmate of mine, we actually programmed computer games to keep my sanity while I was in law school. And then I decided I needed to find a subject area to practice law in that really interested me. I've always been interested in space. I'm what's known as an orphan of Apollo. I'm of the age where I watched Neil and Buzz walk on the moon and was promised that I too could go into space. And that, of course, was denied my generation. And so I said, let's look at space law. And so I've now in 37 years of practice as a walking, talking space lawyer and have loved every minute of it.
So, talk to us about that. Start off by summarizing the legal aspects of our national space strategy.
Sure. So, in terms of the overall space strategy, um, on the one end of the spectrum, we as a nation have to abide by the international treaties, and I won't go into a space law 101, lecture on what that is, but we have laws that govern outer space, and then we have our own domestic laws that govern space. And until recently, space has been really the domain of the government, NASA, except for in the telecommunications sector, which has always been private. Congress set aside that aspect of space to be private from the very beginning. But more recently, as we've seen with SpaceX and Blue Origin and the private companies, is they're now taking a much more important role in outer space. And in fact, we can't get back to the moon in 2024 or 2028 or 2030 without a much larger participation from the commercial sector than we did during the Apollo era.
Without going into Space Law 101, as you called it,
Yeah.
broaden the discussion to summarize international law and UN treaties and how US law is involved and maybe even overlaps.
Sure. So the two fundamental things that you have to understand about the outer space treaties is one is when they came into being. So the outer space treaty is from 1968, and at the time, the Cold War was in full bloom, and so the main goal of the outer space treaty was to make sure that we didn't take our aggression and specifically didn't take nuclear weapons and put them in space. And so that's the whole backdrop of the outer space treaty. But there are two really important components of that. One is that space is to be free for access and use, that's important, for all mankind. And two is nobody can own space or any part of space. And that's the two issues that we as a country have had to deal with since we are one of the few really dominant space powers.
The need to create a legal and regulatory framework for international operations in near Earth orbit is pretty straightforward. What are the issues related to creating an Earth based legal framework for other planets, asteroids, and comets?
Yeah, so again, we have this, the international level. We have to sort of agree, what we're going to do. I think a really good example of what's going on right now in that debate is in 2015, Congress passed legislation for the first time to recognize that if somebody goes out to an asteroid, for example, and mines that asteroids and brings back the the stuff that they get from that they can claim ownership in that. And that's a big step and that's a big debate because, of course, under Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty, you can't own space or any part of it. But the argument is that once you have mined the regolith off of an asteroid, that changes the character of it from no longer being an asteroid to being a product, and therefore you can own that. And so far, the United States has made that move. Luxembourg, which is an up and coming spacefaring country, even though they don't have any launch capabilities, has adopted that same regime. And there are a number of other countries that look like they're going to fall in line. Meanwhile, we've got some other countries that are saying, no, no, you can't. You can't even own what you mine off of asteroids. So that's kind of an ongoing debate, but that really is a prime example of how the interests of countries can differ across the spectrum. But of course, from the United States standpoint, we know that in order to access the resources of space, which are nearly infinite. And if you look at sort of the valuation of just the precious metals in those asteroids, they're trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. I mean, we literally could quadruple instantly the Earth's economy simply by moving out into space and beginning to use the resources there. And of course, the other good part of that is if you mine stuff on Earth in space, it means you're not mining stuff on Earth, which means you're not doing all that ecological damage to to the Earth by strip mining the moon. I would much rather strip mine the moon and strip mine an asteroid than I would burn down a rainforest and strip mine that down here. So in that sense, it's really interesting because often ecologists and the environmental movement and the space movement are at odds, and yet we really should be working together because we have the same goal, which is to have a clean of Earth as possible, but at the same time expand the resources we have access to and increase the quality of life of every human being on the planet.
Along those lines, as business leaders begin taking advantage of the commercialization of space, what legal and regulatory trends should they keep in mind?
So I've talked about this a lot, and I've written extensively on it. The biggest problem that we face in the United States is that we have a regulatory regime which is stovepiped. It's all these different silos, and it was all constructed in the 1970s and 1980s. And the problem is, in the 1970s and 1980s, we anticipated that we would only have a dozen launches a year, which would launch mainly geostationary satellites, maybe a few remote sensing satellites. The problem now is, the good news now is, of course, we're launching on almost a weekly basis. Pretty soon, SpaceX is going to be that or more. And once Blue Origin gets up and launching, we're going to be launching every 2, 3, 4 days. But the problem is, before you can launch, you've got to get to launch a rocket, you've got to get authority from the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. To use frequencies, you've got to get a frequency allocation and a license from the FCC. If you're going to look back at Earth, you have to get a remote sensing license from NOAA. All of those systems are designed to take 3 to 4 years. And of course, now we have people literally building CubeSats that start on the back of a napkin and are flying within 4 to 5 months. And so our entire regulatory scheme in the United States has got to be fast tracked. We've got to put it into hyperdrive. Because I can't tell you how many clients I have right now who are so frustrated because the time delays that they're facing with being able to do anything in space. And unfortunately, what that's also doing is it's sending people overseas. So we've got U.S. companies that would love to do business and be licensed in the United States, but the U.S. regulatory agencies can't move fast enough. So that's why they're going to Luxembourg. That's why they're going to Isle of Man, all these places that have more streamlined processes for getting authorization to do that. And so we could be missing out, even though we're by far the leaders in space technology. We could lag behind in developing a space economy simply because we can't license people fast enough. And that's a huge problem.
Certainly is. James Dunstan, founder of Mobius Legal Group and general counsel at TechFreedom. If somebody wants to connect with you, James, maybe they've got some questions about how to proceed in the commercialization of space or about some of your other work, how can they do that?
So the best way to reach me is by email, JDUNSTAN at TechFreedom, TechFreedom.org. That's an ORG, that's not a .com.
Thanks again, James. And
Thank you, Tonya.
of course, Find more of my interviews right here or at tonyahall.net. Thanks for watching.